5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, I'm Jamie Fouché. Welcome to Exploring Hobbies. Today we're going to be talking about scuba diving, and I have with me Mike Pagioni. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me here.
Yeah, thanks for coming to share your hobby with us. We appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about how you got started in scuba diving.
Well, when I was younger, my father had dove scuba dive, even before I was born, so I grew up around it. And then on my 12th birthday, that was my gift, was scuba diving lessons. So since then, I really haven't looked back. So I've been doing it since.
That's great. So you've been diving for a long time then.
Yeah.
Exciting. Yeah. And that's great that you did it with family,
Yes.
which is great.
Yep.
And so what kind of training do you need to get started in scuba diving?
To get started into scuba diving, you want to earn what we call the open water diver rating. And to earn that rating, it's kind of like a 3-step process. The first 2 steps are pretty much always done together, which is the classroom, the actual learning portion, which is fun. It's not like a stuffy classroom. And then the pool diving, which we officially call confined water training. When you do those 2 things, which most places offer that year-round because pools are open year-round, you then get to go out and actually do open water dives, which is our fancy way of saying like a real body of water. Yeah. So open water dives, you do 4 of those, and when you complete those 4 dives, then you're a certified card-carrying diver, and you can go anywhere in the world and dive. It's recognized all over.
Okay. And those 4 dives that you do as part of the certification process, is that kind of a time thing? Like they want you to spend a certain number of minutes in the water, or is it more of just an experience of going through the whole process a few times?
It's both, actually. So yeah, there is some like, hey, it needs to be this long, it needs to do this. There also is some, we hate to say evaluation, but kind of evaluation where, hey, everything you learned in the pool and you learned in the classroom, you can transfer in the real world, right? You're not just like, oh my gosh, I'm following someone around. We want you to kind of be, transfer those skills, transfer that knowledge. But part of it is just going out and diving. In fact, that's the thing when everyone's like, oh, diving, I'm liking it, but I'm just not as comfortable as I want to be. Our common answer is, we'll just go do it more and you'll get more comfortable. So the 4 dives themselves are really helpful with that.
Okay. And what are the different types of places that you can go? Because I know I'm sure there's local places, but I've also seen where on vacation sometimes they'll offer the ability to do a short certification while you're on site.
And basically any place that has water and that you want to go explore it. I mean, 70% of the world's is water. So if you want to see the world, I don't care how much of a world traveler you are, if you haven't been underwater, you haven't seen as much as a diver. So anywhere there's water, you can pretty much go dive. And obviously, if it's like a marina or something like that, it's not going to be any fun. It's just dirty water. But the Caribbean is super popular, with the airports. It's really easy to get to any Caribbean island you want to go to. Yeah. And there you're going to see, pretty fish, the colorful fish that everyone likes so much, and then the coral. You can go to the West Coast, California up to Washington. You can see like kelp forests and big animals. And then in the Pacific, you got different types of pretty fish and different types of coral, and then you got to start to see some big creatures. So pretty much anywhere in the world you can go diving. And then right here in our own backyard in the Great Lakes, where we don't have the reefs and the pretty fish, we have shipwrecks, lots and lots of shipwrecks. And because the Great Lakes are freshwater, they're in great shape. So for someone that has kind of like that, hey, that's kind of cool, they want to go explore that, we have that not too far away right here in Michigan.
That's great. What kind of equipment do you typically need to dive?
So to get started, you basically need to get your own mask, snorkel, and fins. And the reason you need to do that is they're so custom in terms of their fit, you want to have your own. And most places won't even rent that type of equipment, and if they do, you're not typically going to want it. So those are the things that you want to get started. After that, the other equipment, you don't necessarily need. You can, because a lot of times if people are doing lots of travel and they might not want to take it with them, you can pretty much rent it anywhere else you go. In fact, the one thing that you'll always rent is the scuba cylinder, the tank we call it for short, which holds your air, because the planes aren't too fond of us trying to get those on board. Yeah, so the rest of the equipment in scuba diving, we love acronyms, so half the equipment has like initials for names. The BCD, which is what I have right here, stands for Buoyancy Control Device. So this is the jacket that you'd wear when you were scuba diving. So this holds the tank for you, so you're not just trying to hold it under your arms the whole time. It also fills up with air, so when you're at the surface, you don't have to swim. You can inflate this thing and rest, wait while the boat comes, picks you up, whatever. Also underwater, it allows us to kind of get neutrally buoyant, which is one of the things I really like about diving, is the neutral buoyant. It's kind of that zero gravity feeling. People pay lots of money for a plane to nosedive and get that effect. And once you go underwater with one of these, you just adjust it so you're not sinking, you're not floating, you're just where you are in the water. So this is the BCD that we wear. This is kind of the hub where everything connects. And then the other piece of equipment that you would use would be the scuba regulator. We gave it that fancy name because it regulates the pressure.
Okay.
So it takes the high pressure air from the tank and gives it to you at a pressure that you can breathe, so ambient pressure. And that's what these are. These are what you would breathe off of. You have two, one's for your buddy. So if they're running a little low on air and you like them, you can share air with them.
Save them.
Yeah. And then the other thing on here, one hose will hook up to the BCD so you can get air from the tank, and so you don't have to blow up that BCD. You can just push a button and fill it up with air from the tank. And then the other one is basically a fuel gauge. We call it an SPG because we love initials, so submersible pressure gauge, and that'll show you how much air is in the tank.
Okay.
Also, you'll a lot of times have a compass on here. This one doesn't. I just grabbed it off the shelf. And then you'll have a dive computer, which will tell you how deep you are, how long you've been there, and then we'll calculate some figures for you, the big thing being nitrogen, making sure you're not getting too much nitrogen in your body. Okay. Which everyone always hears the bends, and they think, oh, you're going to get the bends if you go scuba diving. With the dive computer, you keep that in check, and it's not an issue.
That in check. Yeah, I always wondered how that worked with travel, because it just, I mean, clearly there's a decent amount of equipment that's needed to do this, to do it safely.
Yeah.
And I always wondered how people lugged all that stuff all over the world. So it sounds like they don't. For the most part, they probably are taking, like you said, the fins, maybe the mask, and then the rest of the stuff they're probably just renting when
they're pretty much always bringing this stuff. And then about half the divers are just renting it when they get there. But then the other half are, the divers get bags and they bring all their gear, because if you're going somewhere and you're just primarily going to dive, I went to the Exumas, which are part of the Bahamas, for a week. I was diving, multiple dives every day. I was going to be wearing my own equipment, So it's just like any sporting goods. You kind of want your own stuff. Yeah. But it's about half and half.
When you book those when you book scuba excursions, when you're traveling, do they typically include that in the price then, because they know that people are going to be using their equipment? Or is that something that you need to be aware of getting an additional quote on what it's going to cost you to use the equipment as well?
Well, that's a good question. Whenever you fly somewhere, they're always going to include the tank and the air fills and the weight. Sometimes you have to wear a little bit of weight to help you get down too, because they know you're not bringing that with you. The gear, the other gear, will then be an additional charge depending on the type of operation. Again, they're not going to have mass snorkel fins typically for rental. So it is going to be an additional fee to rent the BCD and the regulator. Usually it's fairly reasonable, and then usually it can be easily just not like I got to get there and reserve it. You can just let them know, hey, when I come down, I'm going to need equipment, and it's not a big deal. They'll have it waiting for you on the boat.
Okay, great. Are there different types of diving?
There's lots of different types of diving. Okay. So the main school of diving is what we call recreational diving, so just diving for fun, and that kind of differentiates it from like commercial diving or scientific diving, where we're just diving for fun. And then basically any type of environment or situation where you're like, oh, that's a little bit different than just going underwater, we have a different type of diving for that. So there's night diving at night, we call night diving. Drift diving, where you dive with the current, so you just kind of go one way, you don't go back to the same spot. And of course, the shipwreck diving, where sometimes if it's a big metal shipwreck, your compass won't work the same anymore, so you got to factor that in. Diving with scooters, which we call DPVs, because we love initials again. So diver propulsion vehicle, where you have a scooter kind of pull you around underwater. Even like a type of diving like photography, you wouldn't think, well, I'm just bringing a camera with me. But that is a type of diving because we want people to understand, hey, there's a couple different rules you got to follow with your camera. There's a couple things you got to do. So anytime the diving is a little bit different than the typical dive, we classify it as a different style of diving, and we want people to be aware of what they need to know for that. With diving, let's face it, we're underwater, we're breathing. It's hazardous. People look at that and go, oh, no, not for me. So we want everyone to be safe. We don't want anyone to have any accidents. So the biggest thing to avoid that is no surprises. So we let everyone know everything they need to know about the type of diving that they're going to be doing.
Got it. And what about wetsuits? Do you typically, obviously you'd probably need something like that because the water's cooler, like if you were going to dive a shipwreck here in the Great Lakes somewhere. But what about when you're in the Caribbean or Hawaii or something like that? Do you still typically need a wetsuit, or is that something that's more optional because the water would be warmer?
The water is warmer, and people want it to be optional, but you really, as a diver, should always wear a wetsuit. Even when the water is really warm, you're going to be under it. The average dive is going to be half an hour to an hour. You're going to get chilled. The other thing the wetsuit does is it does protect you. So if you accidentally bump into a jellyfish or into coral, which you shouldn't, but if you accidentally do bump into that stuff, you are protected. So a wetsuit's always a good idea, but divers love situations when they don't have to wear them. You know, when the water is that warm and the sun's out and it's just a great day and maybe it's just a short dive. But for most divers, they're going to do 2, 3, maybe even 4 dives in a day.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how warm the water is, they're going to be wearing a wetsuit.
Okay. And is that another item where typically you're going to invest in one of your own where you're comfortable with it, you like how it fits, as opposed to using the ones that they give you on the, you know, the charter company that you're with?
Yeah, most discriminating divers will get their own wetsuit because there's a joke in diving, which is there's 2 types of divers, those that pee in their wetsuit and those that lie about it. So even when they rent, that rule is still there. So most divers realize that and they're like, I don't want the wetsuit that someone else wore yesterday.
I will never use one of those wetsuits again. Thanks for sharing
No problem.
that. Just
So yeah,
really
most
hadn't
people get
occurred
their
to
own
me.
wetsuit. And then with the wetsuit, fit is so important. If the wetsuit doesn't fit you, it doesn't work. So
Yeah.
most people do get their own wetsuit.
Yeah, that makes sense. What kind of physical requirements are there? Like, do you need to be in really excellent physical condition
me?
to scuba dive? Right? I mean, is this,
Yeah.
and I'm asking because, you know, is this something that's accessible to a wide range of people? Obviously, you have to be fairly comfortable in the water, right?
Yeah, that's the big thing.
You're not supported by a life jacket. I mean, the whole idea is you're down in the water. So you need to be able to swim at least a decent skill level, I would think, in order just to be competent and comfortable with that. But you know, besides that, how physically demanding is it?
It's not, I mean, like I said, I'm no physical specimen here. You need to be comfortable in the water, so you hit it already. Comfortable in the water is the big thing. You do need to, I mean, you're going to swim for half an hour to an hour. Granted, you're going to have fins on, makes it a lot easier. But you need to be comfortable in the water. You need to be able to exert some energy. You know, when people say, you know, what's the typical dive like? It's a lot like a nature hike. You know, if it's no big deal for you to be like, hey, let's go to the park and let's walk around for a couple hours and look at stuff, then diving's probably not going to be an issue for you either. You just have to be comfortable being in the water. So you don't have to be in excellent shape. You can't be totally out of shape. You know, somewhere in the middle is going to work fine. What we always tell people in terms of the swim test, like, well, what kind of swim test do I have to do to get into diving? The big thing is, hey, if I put you in the pool and had you swim around for 10 minutes, would you drown? And if you wouldn't, odds are this is going to be okay for you. So
good to know. Good to know. Do you consider diving to be a fairly safe sport? I mean, are there things that people need to be aware of, though, in terms of common dangers that you need to be educated about before you go on dives?
Yeah, and that's why we do the training. So there are simple things that that divers do to avoid any problem. The most important rule that someone should take away from any kind of Discover Scuba, which is that Try It program you were talking about earlier, or a training, is to never hold your breath when you're diving, which is a pretty easy rule to follow. But some people don't think of that because maybe if they're used to snorkeling and used to holding their breath. So diving as a sport, or underwater breathing, you know, it can be hazardous, but our track record is actually pretty good. We don't have a lot of accidents, and most of the accidents that we do have diving are fingers and feet on boats, slipping on boats and slipping on ladders. So the diving itself, even though it is so risky and so hazardous, the training that we have everyone go through makes it so, hey, we got a pretty good safety record. In fact, and I don't know if the statistics are true anymore, but we used to always brag that we had a better safety record than bowling. And it's still probably true.
It's interesting, okay.
So.
And what about some of the rules around things like protecting the environment? I'm sure that there are some things that are, you know, kind of like common courtesy or even environmental type of things that are just when you scuba, these are things that everyone learns to do. Yeah,
so I mean, ecotourism has taken off so much in the past 5 years, and as divers, I was like, I was doing ecotourism when I was a 13-year-old kid, you know, traveling. We were always big into, because we're traveling places, we want to see their reef. So divers always respect the reef. We don't crash into it. We don't drop our anchor into it. We don't take things when we're diving. You know, we don't, oh, that's a nice piece of coral. It's beautiful. Let me break that off and let it die. You know, a common diver motto is take only pictures, leave only bubbles. So we respect that a lot. And then we encourage places that we go, we always encourage them to protect the underwater habitat. It's really easy to sit on your couch and be like, oh, that island over there, shouldn't overfish that. I can't believe they do that. That's so bad. Whereas, well, they need to, that's how they eat. But as divers, when we go to these places and bring our tourism dollars, and it kind of reinforces the, hey, if you protect this area, we'll come back, we'll tell more people, we'll bring more people, everyone's going to have a job at this hotel and have a job taking us divers out and seeing the coral and seeing the fish that you have there. A little island that I like to go to all the time is Bon Air. It's just north of Venezuela. Mm-hmm. And most of the waters around that island are protected because the divers like it so much, and the divers go there and the island realize, hey, it's better investment for us to protect this than smash the coral and put giant piers in here and do whatever. Because the divers, this is a pretty good thing. These guys come down here from all over and dive this. Divers, you know, just diving like that kind of passively helps the environment. And then we also get active. We do cleanup dives where we'll pick garbage off, you know, from underwater where it's a little bit harder for everyone else to do it. You know, we collected like 200 pounds of garbage from the south shore of Walled Lake last year when we did a cleanup dive. A lot of it was just big, you know, stuff, but, you know, most divers are always going to be involved in some activity like that. I mean, not every time, but every once in a while they definitely get involved. Just like any, you know, mountain bikers or hikers, they're going to clean up where they go.
So it sounds like, though, it's very much a community effort. It's not just the people involved with the sport, but the people who are living and working in the areas where you dive, and it kind of takes a partnership between both sides in order to keep things clean and keep it, you know, so that it makes for a good experience.
Yes. Oh yeah, definitely.
So you mentioned that little island. What are some of your favorite places to dive and why?
Well, it's really hard to go wrong with the Caribbean. All those islands are pretty good. So I really like going down there, and I go down there a lot. Even just off of Florida, on the east coast of Florida there's a lot of good diving. And then the Keys, of course, have some good diving. Locally, just off the thumb, off the, you know, Port Sanilet, kind of up to Port Austin. There's a lot of shipwrecks right there off that stretch. A lot of shipwrecks, actually. So I really like going there, and that season's kind of coming up for me, where we get to go do that a lot more often, almost every weekend, hopefully. During the winter months is when we do more of the Caribbean and that type of traveling. I like Vancouver Island a lot. It's a lot of soft coral, which is kind of cool, and then you get the seals and the sea lions and the giant Pacific octopus. So there's a lot of good diving wherever you go, really. Okay,
great. Good to know. Our family snorkels.
Okay.
And I know scuba is something that we've talked about a lot. We haven't seemed gotten around to do it, but is that common for people to start off snorkeling first and kind of get a taste for liking to see, you know, that whole underwater world and then transition into that? Oh
yeah, definitely. I mean, because when you're snorkeling, you know, you're seeing all that stuff and you're like, hey, I want to go down there farther, or there's other spots that, you know, they don't always take you to as a snorkeler, but as a diver, you can go ahead and go to it. And diving's easier. It's physically easier than snorkeling. You just got to learn some extra stuff. So yeah, I would say most snorkelers, if they're real heavy into it, you know, they're doing a lot of it, they eventually get into scuba diving. So you have really no excuse. You have to get into it.
Yeah, we've done it a few times now, so we'll have to do it one of these times. How are they different? So for someone, you know, for a family like us that has snorkeled, you know, I'd probably say about 5 or 6 times now on different vacations, what are we going to find that's really different about scuba?
Scuba is easier than snorkeling, the physical effort. Because when you're snorkeling, you're at the surface, you're dealing with waves, you're dealing with, you know, the current's going to be stronger, the wind, you know, the sun now is giving you sunburn and things like that. So scuba is easier because you're swimming around underwater. Scuba, you're going to see more life just because you're kind of down at their level and you're not chasing them around. When you're just, you know, at the surface, you're just something that's chasing them basically. Underwater, you get to swim with them a little bit more. And then for snorkeling, you're not going to go to the best sites because you're going to go to a site where, hey, the land's right over there and the water's not going to be too deep. With scuba diving, it's just like, okay, let's go wherever. Where's the good stuff? Let's go there. So you get to see a lot more when you're scuba diving.
Okay, makes sense. When so you mentioned snorkeling with family. If people, maybe their whole family is not into snorkeling, Are there groups that people can join? Do people often travel? If you travel solo, are you most likely going to meet up with people? Because obviously it doesn't sound like a sport that's safe to go out by yourself. So typically I'm assuming you're with groups of people. So if someone wants to have other people to go with, what are kind of some of the ways that they can do that?
Yeah, so you always dive in teams of 2. And then it's really easy as if you're a single diver, any dive boat you sign up for, you're not the only single diver, so they're going to buddy you up with someone. But there's lots of different ways to meet groups. In fact, usually most people, and they're taking the class, they're taking it with 7 other people, so they make some connections right there for future divers. And then there's dive clubs. There's most stores, so my store has a dive club that meets and plans dives. And then any resort you go to where it's got diving, they're going to group people together. The boat's not just going to go take one person out. They're going to be like, all right, we got 8 people going. 4 of them are already buddied up. So the other 4, hey, who are you? You're from Arkansas? Okay, here's this guy from Texas. You guys are buddies, and then they go diving. So it's a great way to meet people too.
Yeah, and so do the clubs typically plan annual trips or quarterly trips, or how does that kind of usually work as part of it? Because that's kind of more of a group travel thing, I'm assuming then.
Yeah, so the clubs usually, every club's a little different. So the club that I'm familiar with, they meet once a month. In the summer, they schedule dives pretty much every other week locally. And then the big excursion dives where they're going to go down to the Caribbean for a week, the clubs kind of back away from that. And then the dive store would do that. So the dive store kind of becomes the center of the social aspect of diving. Everyone kind of meets at the store and has friends at the store, and the dive store sets it up that way. That's the more common way it is now.
Okay, great. So. What's one of the more memorable things that you have seen on a dive?
So there's a wreck off of Harbor Beach up in the Thumb. It's the Dunderberg. It's a schooner, so an old sailboat. It sank in 1868. It was built in 1867.
Wow.
So it wasn't that old when it went down, and it looks that way when you go dive it. It's this schooner on the bottom, this wooden schooner, and the railing's got carving on it. It's got a masthead, a figurehead on it, and all the dead eyes and all the rigging is still on it. The mast is broke off, but it's laying right next to it.
Yeah.
So it's like going into history. You're just going down this line, and hey, here's this shipwreck from 1868, and it's just preserved sitting here on the bottom.
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite wrecks, and every time I go down the line and I see that wreck, it kind of takes me away.
That sounds amazing. Okay, so I have to ask, what about sharks? Because I hear that as a concern from people. Usually when they take you to the snorkel spots, you're in a protected area, that kind of thing. Is that a valid fear if people are concerned about that?
We kill way more sharks than they ever even come close to. In fact, you're more likely to get, you've probably heard they're so cliche now, you're more likely to get hit by lightning twice than bitten by a shark. The holes, tide pools that kids build on the beach, those are more dangerous than sharks. Sharks really don't want anything to do with us. They're pretty scared of us. So especially as a diver, because when they see our whole body underwater, they're like, "Oh, that's pretty big. I'm out of here." And so they're mostly skittish. They're mostly scared of people. In fact, most divers, once they get into diving and are doing a lot of it, they quickly realize that. Because sometimes me saying that, people are like, "Yeah, whatever. You can say that all you want. I don't believe you." But then they get into diving, they realize I haven't seen sharks. So divers typically start to go out of their way to see sharks. They'll be like, "Well, do I see sharks on this dive? Is this a shark dive? Is there sharks going to be around?" Because they want to see sharks. Because they start to realize that no, they're kind of this rare exotic thing that runs away from us, and we don't get to see them. Yeah. The thing is, you've heard about every shark attack that's ever happened because it's sensational. It makes the news, and half the time it's, the guy was fishing in waist deep water and he had bait in his pocket, and the shark was actually like, "Oh, yeah, there's sardines in this guy's pocket. Let me get that." And then it realized it was a guy there. So it's sensational. It makes the news. But sharks, they need to worry more about us than we need to worry about them.
Okay, good to know. I have heard that concern a lot. So
it's huge. Yeah, it's huge, but it's not a big deal. Yeah, no, sharks are not an issue.
Very good. So for someone new to the sport, what advice would you give in terms of, the first things they should do, or the things that they need to, kind of the steps and process they need to take care of if they want to?
Well, the first thing is get signed up for a class, get the training in, because nothing matters until you know what you don't know. So you got to take the training and learn all about diving, and that's where it's gonna, everything's gonna fall into place, and you'll know exactly what to do. After that, then it's just spinning the globe and putting your finger down. But the training is the big part. That's the huge first step.
Okay. And then in terms of getting their own equipment, I'm assuming the dive shops are all helpful in terms of, because I would think once you're into the sport, you kind of learn what you like and what you don't. But for someone who's just getting into it, understanding that there's some things you need to invest in and understanding how to fit them properly and what to look for and that kind of thing is something very different.
Yeah. So, I'm partial, of course, to my own store. So if someone comes into the store and they're like, yeah, I'm really interested in this, I want to learn how to dive, we make sure we take the time to, okay, well, you got to get fitted for a mask. You got to make sure that fits you. Otherwise, it's going to fill with water and you're not going to be able to see anything. Mm-hmm. So whenever you find the store, and there's a lot of great stores in the Michigan area. I'm partial again to mine, but a lot of good stores. You walk into any one of them and say, hey, I want to learn how to dive. They're going to take you from there. They're going to take over. They're going to tell you what you need for the class, which is going to be the mask, snorkel, and fins, and they're going to give you lots of different schedules for that class. And they're going to take the time to make sure this stuff fits you. And then usually what happens is during the class, you're like, no, I changed my mind on this. They're going to switch it out. They're going to make sure you get you the right stuff. And then during the class, you're going to wear rental equipment. You're going to be diving. So you start to really quickly figure out what you like or what you don't like.
Okay. And when you take that first dive, that's not part of the class, are there certain dives that kind of make for a good first experience as opposed to certain dives that as you develop better skills are better for someone who's more advanced? How are those different?
You always want to stay in your comfort zone. So what you do is every dive you do, it's familiar enough with your last dive that it's kind of, okay, yeah, I know where to go from that. So you just slowly kind of push that edge out. So usually people's first non-training dive is the same spot where they just finished up the training dive. What we do with our divers is, we dive over the weekend and they finish their last dive, and then we say, oh, by the way, we brought an extra tank for you. Go out and do another dive. We're not going with you. And so that kind of forces that on them. But they're going to the same site where they went before. And so it's new, it's exciting, but it's within their comfort zone. So you always kind of keep it within your comfort zone, and you just kind of slowly push. And that's true with depth or with conditions. If you're like, oh, I haven't gone that deep before, well, don't necessarily go that deep. Just kind of slowly push to it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
It's been great talking with you. So you mentioned your store a couple times.
Yeah.
Tell us about your store real quick. Let people know where they can go. And then also, are there other places where people can learn more about scuba diving? Yeah.
So in terms of learning more about scuba diving, scubaandsnorkel.com, PADI.com, which is PADI.com. That's the trading agency.
Okay.
My store is Motor City Scuba. We're in Novi. We're on Grand River, right there, just west of Haggerty. But if they're not in this area, really any store is going to be very helpful. And there's a few stores around, so call your local store and get in there and figure out what you need to do to get started. But or come see me at my store.
All right. Great. Thanks so much,
Mike,
for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for watching today, and please keep an eye out for future episodes of Exploring Hobbies.